And this is the kind of thing that the team are seeing within the Southwest and wider. Many businesses, both large and small, are actually becoming producers of power, which they can sell effectively to the grid, or at least they get WOCs, which are sort of certificates or units for each unit of power that they actually make and manufacture, and then they get credit for that. So there's an opportunity to make money out of making power. The other thing that is happening is that companies like Imerys, which of course are massive landowners in Cornwall and to some extent in Devon, are actually using their spare land and turning their spare land into energy generators or into profit centres in other ways and maximising the value. I suppose the Eden project is perhaps the best example. It's been around for years now, but that was a fantastic example of that. Some are turning the waste product into power, into electricity. If you have sufficient heat, then you could link it to a combined heat and power plant as well, which could not only run the manufacturing needs of your own factory, but could also be sold to the grid effectively. Southwest Devon Waste Partnership are looking at this, looking at actually generating energy from a waste plant. And whatever the business sector, whether you're in a green sector already, whether you're into clean tech or renewable energy, call it what you will, because of the way that the market is going and the way that this issue is up in lights for both the consumer and other buyers of your services and goods, there is a lot of product displacement. So there is a lot of research going into creating products which are greener, which don't produce so much carbon, and of course creating new products as well as adapting existing products. The car industry is an obvious example of that. It's a sector, we've already talked about funding and the difficulties of getting funding. It is a sector where, in our experience, money is available, both from the banks and also from private equity. Of course, there has to be a sound business case. A lot of thought has to go into that, and we've already seen that from presentations before mine. But it is there. I went to a corporate finance drinks during Southampton, where I'm currently based, last Thursday, and I met somebody from HSBC, and he was saying that this is a preferred sector for their funding. They will lend money to the right project, but if it's a choice, then the clean tech renewable energy sector is a preferred sector. It's slightly easier to get that tick in the box. If anybody disagrees with that and is finding it different, let me know. He said it's the same across all the banks. They need to follow, they also need to lead. They can't afford to be different. Now moving into some of the tax reliefs which are available. The chief tax relief to look at, the important point to make, perhaps I should just take a step back and say, the important point to make here is that there is not a code of green or renewable energy tax reliefs available for the sector, designed to encourage that kind of thing. What there is, and this is typical of our tax system, there are a number of reliefs, a range of reliefs which you need to be aware of, which you need to look at, check that you meet the conditions. If you can change things a bit to meet the conditions even better, to plan to meet those conditions, but you can't look in one place and get them all. But this is the main one. Now this is called the Research and Development Tax Credit Relief. First came in for SMEs in 2001, has been extended to larger companies. Post 1 August 2008, just to define those terms, a small, medium entity is one with employees of up to 500. It used to be 250. Note that change. You may have thought it wasn't worth claiming because you were large, not small, but now, with this extension, a lot of companies are looking back at the SME relief. The SME relief, as we'll see later, is much more favourable. So you have to satisfy the employee test, have less than 500 employees, and then you have to satisfy one of the other tests, either the turnover test, which is 100 million euros, or a balance sheet total of 96 million euros. They have gone up substantially, effective 1st of August 2008, So if you've looked at the scheme before and decided it wasn't worth the hassle because you were not an SME, then it's worth looking again. I said that the SME relief is more favourable. It's because after the 1st of August 2008, every £100 that you spend will attract tax relief of 175%. So if you pay tax at 20%, your tax saving is 20% of 75. Because if you hadn't claimed it, you'd have claimed the 100 you spent anyway. So the uplift of 75 at your tax rate, should we say 20%, is your tax saving. What's very important is that in those early years of startup, you may well have losses. We've heard a little bit about the costs of actually developing a product and the lead time, all of which you are very well aware of. So you can actually, under the small scheme, the SME scheme, but a large company can't do this, you can actually surrender or give up your loss. So you say to HMRC, we've actually made a tax loss at the bottom of our tax computation. We will actually surrender it, we'll give it up. But in return, HMRC will give you money, which doesn't always happen unless you've overpaid tax, and then you have to wait for it. They will pay you broadly 24% of what you've spent. It's a credit of 14% after 1st of August 2008, but it works out, if you do the maths, as pretty much 24 pence in every pound that an SME spends on R&D. So it's well worth having, because of course it goes into funding further research. Just very quickly, I'm not sure if we have many in the audience at all, but a larger company can only claim 130% of its expenditure. However, the conditions are probably not quite as strict as some of the SME conditions. A very important point to make is that in order to claim the R&D tax credit, an SME must own the IP. Goes back to a question from a previous presentation. Whereas a large company doesn't have to own the IP, which it is actually spending money to create, which is why you see a lot of large companies, particularly overseas-owned ones, have their R&D functions overseas, but they have a base within the UK where there is an R&D team working. Even though the IP is held by a licensing company overseas, the UK can still claim the R&D credit. That doesn't apply to SMEs. The important point to make is that if you've looked at this and decided it wasn't for you, or if it's new to you, and it's surprising how many people say to us, well, why hasn't somebody told me about this for something that's been around for 8 years? You are still in time to make claims within 2 years of the end of your accounting period, so the end of your financial year end. So if you have a March 08 year end, you've got until March 2010 to make a claim for 2008. And of course, by definition, you're well within time for 2009. So you do have time to look at this.